I remember the weight of my mother's hand on mine that night, how her fingers trembled just slightly, like a bird's wing before flight. The table was set with our grandmother's china, the kind we only used for occasions that mattered, each plate rimmed in gold that caught the candlelight and threw it back in fractured pieces. The dining room smelled of rosemary and garlic, of bread baking in the oven, of the lamb roasting since afternoon. It smelled like home, like safety, like all the dinners that had come before. I was 23 then, recently graduated, still living in the guest room while I figured out what came next. My mother had been cooking since dawn, her movements in the kitchen practiced and precise, though I noticed she kept checking her phone, kept looking out the window toward the driveway. When I asked if she needed help, she smiled that smile I knew too well, the one that said everything was fine when it wasn't. "Just set the table, sweetheart," she'd said. "Make it beautiful." So I did. I folded the linen napkins into careful triangles, arranged the silverware with the precision she taught me as a child, placed the wine glasses just so. The chandelier above cast warm light across everything, making the whole room glow like something from a painting. My father was in the living room, reading the paper, oblivious to my mother's tension. My younger brother was upstairs, probably gaming with his headphones on. It was just another Thursday evening, except it wasn't. Uncle Marcus arrived first, his booming laugh preceding him through the door. He swept my mother into a hug that lifted her off her feet, and she laughed, but I heard the tightness in it, the way it didn't quite reach her eyes. He'd always been like that, larger than life, filling every space he entered with his presence. He owned 3 restaurants downtown, drove a car that cost more than most people's houses, wore suits that probably cost what I made in a month at my part-time job. "There's my favorite sister," he said, though she was his only sister. He handed her a bottle of wine that looked expensive, the label in French. "Brought the good stuff, only the best for family, right?" My mother took it with both hands, held it for a moment like she was weighing more than just the bottle. "You're too generous, Marcus." "Nonsense. Family takes care of family." The words hung in the air, and something flickered across my mother's face. Too quick for me to name, but I felt it like a change in pressure before a storm. Then Aunt Carol arrived with her husband, then Cousin Jennifer with her 2 kids, then my father's brother with his new girlfriend. The house filled with voices, with laughter, with the sound of people who belonged together, or at least pretended to. My mother moved through them all like a dancer, taking coats, pouring drinks, directing traffic toward the dining room. She'd changed into a navy dress that made her look elegant and composed, her hair swept up, her makeup perfect. But I kept catching these moments. A pause at the kitchen counter, her hand pressed flat against the granite like she needed something solid to hold her up. A glance toward Uncle Marcus that lasted a beat too long. The way she checked her watch 3 times in 5 minutes. "Mom," I said, cornering her by the stove as she basted the lamb one final time. "Are you okay?" She looked at me then, really looked at me, and for just a second I saw something in her eyes that scared me. Not fear exactly, but a kind of resigned determination, like someone about to step off a cliff who's already made peace with the fall. "I'm fine, baby," she said, and kissed my forehead. Her lips were cold. "Help me carry things in?" We ferried dishes to the dining room, roasted vegetables glazed with honey, potatoes crispy with duck fat, a salad of bitter greens and pomegranate seeds that looked like scattered jewels. The lamb came last, golden and perfect, and everyone applauded as my mother set it on the table. Uncle Marcus stood to carve it, because he always did, because he said he had the steadiest hands, the best technique from all those years working in restaurant kitchens. "A toast," he announced, raising his glass. "To family, to the people who know us best, who've been there through everything. May we always take care of each other." Glasses clinked. I drank and felt the wine spread warmth through my chest. My mother barely touched hers, I noticed. She was watching Uncle Marcus carve the meat, watching his hands move with practiced efficiency, and her jaw was tight. We began to eat. The food was extraordinary. It always was when my mother cooked. Conversation flowed around the table, stories overlapping, jokes landing, the comfortable chaos of a family dinner. My father told his terrible puns and made everyone groan. Cousin Jennifer's kids argued over who got the wishbone. Aunt Carol complimented my mother on the seasoning, asked for the recipe, knowing full well my mother never wrote anything down. It's all about the timing, my mother said, knowing exactly when to add each ingredient, when to turn up the heat, when to let things simmer, when to serve something, and when to wait. Something in her voice made me look up. She was staring at Uncle Marcus, who was focused on his plate, cutting his lamb into perfect squares. He looked content, satisfied, like a man who had everything he wanted. His suit jacket hung on his chair, his tie loosened, his shirt sleeves rolled up. He'd gained weight since I'd last seen him, his face fuller, his middle thicker. Success looked good on him, everyone always said. He'd earned it. My mother's hand found mine under the table. Her palm was damp, her fingers ice cold despite the warm room. She squeezed once, hard, and I turned to her in surprise. She was smiling at something Aunt Carol was saying, nodding along, but her hand stayed locked around mine, and then, so quickly I almost missed it, she slipped something into my palm, a piece of paper folded small. I glanced at her, questioning, but she was laughing now at my father's joke about the traffic on the highway, her whole attention seemingly on the conversation. Under the table, she squeezed my hand again, urgent, and then released it. The paper felt heavy in my palm, heavier than it should have. I closed my fingers around it and felt my heart begin to race. I waited. Minutes passed. The conversation moved to politics, to sports, to someone's vacation plans. My brother was arguing with Uncle Marcus about some basketball game, both of them getting animated, voices rising in that competitive way men in my family always talked. I unfolded the paper in my lap, careful, keeping my movements small. The handwriting was my mother's, neat, controlled, unmistakable. Pretend you're sick. Leave the table now. Don't eat anything else. Trust me. I read it 3 times, my pulse pounding in my ears. When I looked up, my mother was passing the bread basket to Aunt Carol, asking about her garden, acting completely normal. But her eyes, when they met mine for just an instant, were pleading, trust me. I didn't understand. The food was delicious, everyone was eating, laughing, enjoying themselves. Nothing was wrong, everything was perfect. But my mother's hand had been shaking when she passed me that note, and her eyes were afraid, and she'd never lied to me about anything that mattered. I pressed my hand to my stomach and let my face go pale. It wasn't hard. I already felt sick with confusion and rising dread. I don't feel well, I said, interrupting my brother mid-sentence. Everyone turned to look at me. I think I need to lie down. My mother was on her feet instantly. Oh, honey, what's wrong? My stomach. I feel really nauseous all of a sudden. Concern rippled around the table. My father stood, paternal worry creasing his face. Did you eat something earlier? You were fine 10 minutes ago. I don't know. I stood, letting myself sway just slightly. I'm sorry. I need to go upstairs. My mother came around the table, put her arm around my waist. I'll help you up. Everyone, please keep eating. She probably just needs to rest. Her voice was calm, soothing, but her fingers dug into my side hard enough to bruise. She steered me toward the stairs, and I let her, still clutching the note in my sweaty palm. At the bottom of the stairs, away from the dining room, she stopped and turned me to face her. Up close, I could see she'd been crying earlier. Her makeup was flawless, but her eyes were red-rimmed, the kind of red that concealer can't quite hide. Stay in your room, she whispered. Lock the door. Don't come down no matter what you hear. Do you understand me? Mom, what's happening? You're scaring me. I know, I'm sorry, but I need you to trust me, please. She cupped my face in both hands. I would never let anything happen to you, never. But right now, I need you upstairs, safe, away from... She stopped, glanced back toward the dining room where laughter was still spilling out. Just stay upstairs. Promise me. I promise, but... No buts. Go, now. She practically pushed me up the stairs, and I went, my legs shaking, the note crumpled in my fist. At the top, I looked back and saw her standing at the bottom, watching me. She looked small suddenly, smaller than I'd ever seen her, and so incredibly alone. Then she straightened her shoulders, smoothed her dress, and walked back toward the dining room with her head high. I went to my room and locked the door like she'd asked. My hands were trembling so badly it took 3 tries. I sat on my bed and tried to make sense of what was happening. The note lay on my comforter, my mother's handwriting stark against the white paper. Don't eat anything else. Why? What was in the food? But everyone else was eating it. My father, my brother, everyone. Just normal dinner. Just family. Except it wasn't normal. My mother had known something was wrong. She'd known before it happened. I waited. Minutes crawled by. I could hear the muffled sounds of conversation downstairs, occasional laughter, the clink of dishes, normal sounds, safe sounds. I started to feel foolish, wondered if I'd overreacted, if my mother was just being overly cautious about something. Maybe I'd eaten something earlier that disagreed with me and she'd noticed me looking pale. Maybe. The scream cut through the house like a knife. It was high, sharp, terrified. Aunt Carol's voice, I thought, though it was hard to tell. Then chaos erupted, shouting, the crash of something heavy falling, my father's voice bellowing questions, children crying. I ran to my door, pressed my ear against it, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might break through my ribs. "Call 911, someone shouted. "Oh God, oh God. Marcus, Marcus, can you hear me? He's not breathing right. Get back, give him space." What the hell happened? I don't know, he was fine and then... Uncle Marcus. Something had happened to Uncle Marcus. I grabbed my doorknob, ready to unlock it, to run down and help, but my mother's voice echoed in my head. "Don't come down, no matter what you hear." My hand froze. I pressed myself against the door and listened to the panic unfold below. Footsteps thundered up the stairs, my father, I could tell by the heavy tread. He pounded on my brother's door. "Stay in your room," he shouted. Then he was at my door. "Are you okay in there?" "I'm fine," I called back. "What's happening?" "Your uncle. Something's wrong. We're calling an ambulance." "Stay put until we know what's going on." His footsteps retreated. I heard him on his phone, giving our address, describing symptoms I couldn't quite make out. Downstairs, the chaos continued. Someone was sobbing, Aunt Carol probably. Furniture scraped across the floor. My mother's voice rose above it all, calm and clear. "Everyone step back. Give him air. The ambulance is coming." I cracked my door open, just an inch, and peered out. From the top of the stairs, I could see into the dining room. Uncle Marcus was on the floor, visible through the archway, convulsing. His face was red, then purple, his hands clawing at his throat. My father and Aunt Carol's husband were trying to help him, but they clearly didn't know what to do. The children were being ushered away by Jennifer, their faces white with shock. And my mother stood to the side, watching, her arms crossed over her chest, her expression completely unreadable. The ambulance arrived in minutes that felt like hours. Paramedics rushed in with equipment, took over, worked on Uncle Marcus with professional efficiency. I watched them load him onto a stretcher, oxygen mask over his face, his eyes rolling back. Aunt Carol climbed into the ambulance with him, and then they were gone, sirens wailing into the night. The house fell into shocked silence. Everyone stood in the dining room or the foyer, not quite looking at each other. The perfect dinner was ruined, food cold on plates, wine spilled on the tablecloth, chairs overturned. My father was pacing, running his hands through his hair. My brother had come downstairs and stood in the corner, pale and shaken. "What happened?" Jennifer kept asking. "He was fine. He was laughing. What the hell happened?" No one had an answer, or at least no one was saying it out loud. My mother began to clean up. She moved through the dining room, stacking plates, clearing glasses, her movements mechanical. When my father tried to stop her, "Mary, leave it, we'll deal with it later," she just shook her head and kept working. I watched her from the stairs, still hidden, still locked in my room like she'd told me. She scraped food into the trash, wrapped leftovers in foil, wiped down the table. When she got to Uncle Marcus's plate, she paused for a long moment, staring down at his half-eaten lamb, his barely touched vegetables. Then she picked up his wine glass, still holding a finger of red wine, and poured it down the sink. I understood then, or I thought I did. The note, the warning, the way she'd watched him eat. Something in the food, something in the wine. But that didn't make sense, because everyone else had eaten too, had drunk from the same bottles, and they were fine. My father was fine, my brother, Aunt Carol, Jennifer, everyone. Only Uncle Marcus had. Unless whatever it was had been meant only for him. The thought made my stomach drop. I backed away from my door, sat heavily on my bed, and tried to process what I was thinking. My mother wouldn't. She couldn't. The woman who packed my lunches with little notes, who stayed up all night when I was sick, who taught me to bake bread and ride a bike and be kind to people even when they didn't deserve it, that woman wouldn't poison her own brother, would she? I didn't sleep that night. I heard my parents in their room, my father's voice rising and falling, my mother's quiet responses. I heard my brother in the bathroom, throwing up, probably from stress. I heard the house settle into its nighttime sounds, creaking and sighing, while I lay in the dark and wondered if I knew my mother at all. Around 3 a.m, someone tapped on my door, soft, tentative. I almost didn't answer, but then I heard her voice, "Sweetheart, are you awake?" I opened the door. My mother stood in the hallway in her bathrobe, her face scrubbed clean of makeup, looking suddenly old in a way I'd never noticed before. There were lines around her eyes, gray in her hair I'd thought was just blonde. She looked exhausted and sad and somehow relieved all at once. "How are you feeling?" she asked. "Fine. I was never actually sick." "I know." She glanced down the hallway toward my parents' bedroom, then stepped into my room and closed the door behind her. "We need to talk, but not here, not now. Tomorrow. Can you meet me for coffee in the morning? Just the two of us?" "Mom, please, I'll explain everything, I promise. But I need," she trailed off, seemed to fold in on herself slightly. "I need one more night of you not hating me." The words hit me like a punch. I could never hate you. She smiled, sad and knowing. "Ask me that again tomorrow." She kissed my forehead, her lips were warm this time, and left. I stood in the dark of my room for a long time after, watching the moon track across my window, and wondered what kind of person my mother really was beneath the careful layers she'd built up over years. We met at a small cafe near the river, the kind of place where no one we knew would see us. My mother was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table with 2 coffees growing cold in front of her. She looked like she hadn't slept, dark circles under her eyes despite the makeup, her hands wrapped around her cup like she needed the warmth even though it was June and already humid. I sat down across from her and waited. The cafe was quiet, just a few other customers, soft jazz playing over the speakers. Through the window, I could see jogger on the riverside path, dogs being walked, life continuing normally while my world tilted sideways. "Uncle Marcus is stable," my mother said finally. "Your father talked to Carol this morning. They think it was an allergic reaction, anaphylaxis. They're running tests. But he's not allergic to anything. Not that anyone knew about, apparently." She said it flatly, no inflection, staring at her coffee. "The doctor said it's possible to develop allergies later in life. Something in the food triggered it. They asked what he ate." "What did Dad tell them?" "Everything, the whole menu. They're analyzing it all." She looked up at me then, her eyes clear and direct. "They won't find anything unusual. Everything I cooked was perfectly safe. Standard ingredients, nothing exotic, nothing that could cause that kind of reaction in a healthy adult." The way she said it, so certain, so calm, made my skin prickle. "Then how—" "His wine glass," she said quietly. I added something to his wine glass specifically, something I'd been researching, something that would mimic anaphylaxis if you didn't know what to look for, something that leaves the system quickly, especially if treated fast enough, which he was. She paused. I called 911 from the kitchen before anyone else even realized something was wrong. I made sure the ambulance got there in time to save him. I couldn't breathe. The cafe seemed to shrink around us, the walls pressing in. My mother, my kind, gentle mother who cried at sad movies and fed stray cats, was telling me she'd poisoned her brother. deliberately, carefully, with enough medical knowledge to make it look accidental. Why? The word came out hoarse. She was quiet for a long time, her fingers tracing the rim of her cup. When she spoke, her voice was distant, like she was remembering something from very far away. 25 years ago, your Uncle Marcus and I started a business together, she began. A restaurant. It was my idea, my concept, my recipes, everything I'd been dreaming about since I was a little girl. Your grandmother had left us both some money when she died, and I wanted to invest mine in something meaningful. Marcus was in culinary school, learning the business side, and he seemed perfect to handle that part while I focused on the creative side. We were partners, equal partners. I trusted him completely. She paused, took a sip of cold coffee, grimaced. We worked for 3 years to get that restaurant off the ground. I developed every recipe, designed the whole menu, created the atmosphere, everything. Marcus handled the legal stuff, the paperwork, the business licenses. I signed whatever he put in front of me because he was my brother, and I trusted him. Why wouldn't I? I already knew where this was going, felt it settling in my stomach like lead. The restaurant opened, and it was immediately successful, beyond what we'd even dreamed. Critics loved it, we had wait lists weeks long, we were making money hand over fist. And then, about 6 months in, Marcus told me we needed to restructure. For tax purposes, he said, legal protection. He had papers drawn up, said they were just formalities, that nothing would really change. I signed them. My mother's voice had gone flat, emotionless, the way people sound when they're describing trauma they've learned to wall off. What I didn't know, what I was too trusting, too naive, too stupid to verify, was that those papers transferred sole ownership to Marcus. All of it. Everything. The restaurant I'd created was suddenly his alone. My recipes, my concepts, everything I'd built, legally his. When I found out, when I confronted him, he said I could stay on as a chef if I wanted, but it was his business now. He offered me a salary. A salary for my own creation. Mom, I whispered, horror washing over me. I fought it. Of course I fought it. I got a lawyer, but Marcus had covered his checks perfectly. I'd signed everything. It was all legal. The judge said I should have been more careful, should have read what I was signing, that it was my own fault for being careless with business documents. So I lost. I lost everything. My dream, my money, my grandmother's inheritance, all of it. Gone. She looked at me then, and I saw rage in her eyes, deep, old rage that had been burning quietly for decades. Your father and I were dating at the time. He tried to help, but what could he do? We got married that year anyway, started over, built a different life. I never cooked professionally again, couldn't bear it. Every time I saw Marcus's restaurant, and then his second restaurant, and his third, all built on my recipes, my vision, my work, it was like losing it all over again. Why didn't you tell me? Tell any of us? What good would it have done? It was over, done. Marcus got rich off my work, and I became a housewife, a mother, which is important, which I don't regret, but it wasn't what I dreamed. And every family dinner, every holiday, every time your father insisted we let bygones be bygones and include Marcus, I had to smile and pretend I didn't hate him, had to watch him live the life I should have had. So you decided to poison him? I said it flat, still trying to comprehend. After all these years, you just... No, she cut me off sharply. Not just. This took years of planning, years of research, of learning, of waiting for the right moment. I'm not impulsive, sweetheart. I'm patient. She leaned forward. Do you know what Marcus has been doing lately? He's writing a cookbook, using my recipes, the ones he stole, the ones that made him famous, and putting his name on them, his face on the cover, his story about building a restaurant empire from nothing. Her hands had curled into fists. From nothing, while I gave up everything, raised you kids, supported your father, and watched my brother take credit from my life's work. So yes, I decided it was time he faced consequences. Not death, I'm not a murderer, but fear, pain, the knowledge that someone close to him, someone he trusted, could hurt him, the way he hurt me. I sat back, my head spinning. The mother I'd known my whole life was suddenly a stranger, capable of this kind of cold, calculated revenge, planning it for years. And yet, "You warned me," I said. "The note, you made sure I wouldn't eat anything dangerous." "Of course I did. I would never risk you or your brother. Only Marcus's glass was tainted. Only his. Everyone else was completely safe." She reached across the table, tried to take my hand, but I pulled back instinctively. Pain flashed across her face. "I know you think I'm a monster right now." "I don't know what I think." "That's fair." She withdrew her hand, folded them both in her lap. "I've lived with this for 25 years. The injustice, the betrayal, the rage. It's been eating me alive from the inside out. Your father doesn't understand. He thinks I should have gotten over it, moved on. But how do you get over someone stealing your dreams? How do you forgive that?" "So you don't," I said quietly. "You get even instead." Yes, simple, direct, no apology in it. I got even. And now it's done. Marcus will recover. He'll probably never know what really happened. But I'll know. And every time he looks at me from now on, I'll see it in his eyes, that flicker of uncertainty, of fear. That's enough for me. We sat in silence for a while. Outside, the world continued its ordinary rhythms. Inside, I tried to reconcile the mother I'd loved with this woman who'd poisoned her brother and felt no remorse. Were they the same person? Had she always been capable of this, and I'd just been too young, too sheltered to see it? "What happens now?" I asked finally. "Now? Nothing. Life goes on. Marcus recovers, tells everyone about his scary allergy experience, maybe writes it into his cookbook as a dramatic chapter. Your father and I continue on as normal. You go back to figuring out your life." She paused. "Unless you're going to turn me in." The question hung between us. I thought about it, going to the police, telling them what she'd confessed, watching her be arrested, prosecuted, sent to prison. My mother. I thought about my father's face if that happened, my brother's confusion, the destruction of our family. I thought about Uncle Marcus, who'd stolen my mother's dream and made millions off it while she packed school lunches and volunteered at bake sales. "I don't know," I said honestly. "I need time to think." She nodded, like she'd expected that. "Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere." She stood, leaving her untouched coffee on the table. "For what it's worth, sweetheart, I'm sorry you had to find out this way. I'm sorry I put you in this position. But I'm not sorry for what I did. I can't be." She left. I sat there for another hour, watching the river flow past, thinking about justice and revenge, about the weight of old wounds, about how well we really know the people we love. My coffee went cold. The cafe filled up with the lunch crowd, and I still didn't have answers. Over the following weeks, I watched my family carefully, seeing it with new eyes. Uncle Marcus recovered fully, though the incident had shaken him. He was more careful now, more cautious, checking ingredients obsessively, carrying an EpiPen everywhere. The confidence he'd always radiated had dimmed just slightly, replaced by a wariness that hadn't been there before. My mother had achieved exactly what she wanted. He was afraid. At a family barbecue a month later, I watched them interact. Marcus was quieter than usual, less boisterous. When my mother handed him a plate of food, I saw him hesitate, just for a second, before taking it, and I saw her notice, saw the tiny smile that curved her lips before she turned away. It was done. The power had shifted. She'd wounded him in a way that couldn't be seen but would never heal. I started researching then, digging into the past. I found old newspaper articles about the restaurant. Chef Marcus Chen opens a claimed new eatery, with photos of him in the kitchen, credited as sole owner and creative visionary. No mention of my mother anywhere, though her recipes were clearly described in the reviews. I found the business registration documents through a friend who worked in records. Everything was indeed in Marcus's name alone, transferred from joint ownership in a single transaction dated 24 years ago. Legal, binding, irreversible. I talked to my father one night, carefully, asking about that time in their lives. He sighed, said it had been rough, that my mother had been devastated, but these things happen in business. You have to be smart, read what you sign. He didn't blame Marcus, or if he did, he'd learned not to say it out loud. Water under the bridge, he said. Marcus is family. You forgive family. But my mother hadn't forgiven. She'd remembered. She'd planned. She'd acted. I spent a lot of time that summer thinking about what justice means, what forgiveness requires, what we owe to the people who hurt us. The easy answer would be to say my mother was wrong, that revenge is never justified, that she should have let it go. But when I imagined it, decades of watching your dream live on under someone else's name, watching them prosper from your work, watching them be celebrated for your creativity while you faded into domesticity, I couldn't honestly say what I would have done in her place. There's something about being a woman I was starting to understand, about having your work taken and your contributions erased, that creates a special kind of rage. A quiet rage that simmers for years because you've been taught to swallow it, to be gracious, to not make scenes. My mother had swallowed it for 25 years, and then, for one night, she'd let it out. One evening in August, I found her in the kitchen making bread, her hands working the dough with rhythmic, practiced movements that looked almost like meditation. The house smelled of yeast and warmth. I sat at the counter and watched her work, the way I had as a child, when everything seemed simple and safe. I'm not going to tell anyone, I said finally, about what happened. Her hands stilled for just a moment, then continued kneading. Why not? Because I struggled to put it into words. Because what Marcus did to you was legal, but it wasn't right. And what you did to him was wrong, but it wasn't unjust. And I don't know where that leaves us morally, but I know I don't want to lose you. I don't want to be the one who destroys this family, even if maybe it deserves to be destroyed for what everyone let happen to you. She shaped the dough into a round, placed it in a bowl, covered it with a cloth. Only then did she look at me, her eyes bright with unshed tears. You don't think less of me? I think I understand you better, which is different. I paused. I think you're capable of things I didn't know anyone was capable of. I think you carried pain for so long it turned into something else, something harder and colder. And I think you're right that it's not fair what happened to you. But Mom, I also think... I stopped, making sure I wanted to say this. I think maybe you should talk to someone, a therapist, because holding that much anger for that many years, it changes you, and I don't want you to lose yourself to it. She was quiet for a long time, washing her hands, drying them carefully on a towel. Maybe, she said finally. Maybe, you're right. Then she turned to me. But you have to understand, sweetheart, some things can't be forgiven. Some betrayals are too deep. What Marcus did to me, it wasn't just about the business or the money. It was about trust, family. He knew what that restaurant meant to me, and he took it anyway, because he could. Because he knew I'd signed without reading carefully. Because he knew I trusted him too much to protect myself. That kind of betrayal, it doesn't heal. I know, I said, and I did. I was beginning to understand that there are wounds that go so deep they become part of your foundation. You can't remove them without the whole structure collapsing. All you can do is learn to live with them, build around them, and sometimes, maybe, let them inform how you fight back against a world that wasn't fair to begin with. The bread rose. She baked it. We ate it warm with butter, sitting at the kitchen table as evening light slanted through the windows, and we didn't talk about revenge or justice or any of it. We just ate bread, and it was perfect. Golden crust, tender interior, exactly right. Because my mother had always known how to create perfect things, even if the world didn't give her credit for them. The seasons changed. Uncle Marcus's cookbook came out that fall, and it was successful. Bestseller lists, cooking show appearances, the works. I went to his book launch because my father insisted the whole family should be there. I watched Marcus sign copies, watched him talk about his journey as a chef, watched him tell stories about developing recipes over years in his kitchen. He never mentioned my mother, not once. Several of the recipes I recognized from dinners at our house, dishes my mother had been making since I was a child. But in the book, they were his creativity, his innovation, his legacy. My mother stood next to me at the launch, champagne in hand, smiling pleasantly. To anyone watching, she was the proud sister, supporting her successful brother. But I felt the tension in her body, saw the way her jaw tightened when he told a story about his famous lamb dish, the same lamb she'd served the night she poisoned him, the recipe she'd created decades ago. "You okay?" I whispered. "Fine," she said, and I believed her, because she'd already gotten her revenge. This, the book, the acclaim, the money, it still stung, but it didn't have the power to destroy her anymore. She'd taken that power back, in her own way, on her own terms. She'd hurt him like he'd hurt her, and now they were even, or as even as they'd ever be. As we were leaving, Marcus caught up to us in the parking lot. "Mary," he called, "wait up." We stopped. He jogged over, slightly out of breath, his face flushed with success and champagne. "Thanks for coming," he said. "It means a lot, having family here." My mother smiled at him, and there was something in that smile, something sharp and cold and satisfied that I'd never seen before. "Of course, Marcus, we wouldn't have missed it." "Congratulations on your success." "Listen," he said, and he actually looked sincere. "I know things were complicated back when we started the restaurant. I know you felt like—" He stopped, seemed to reconsider his words. "Anyway, I wanted to say thank you for being cool about everything, for being here tonight. You're a good sister." The audacity of it took my breath away. After everything, after stealing her work, her money, her dreams, he was thanking her for being cool about it, for not making a fuss, for being a good sister. My mother's smile never wavered. "We're family, Marcus. Family forgives." She reached out and squeezed his arm, and I saw him flinch, just barely, just a fraction, but it was there. That wariness, that tiny kernel of fear she'd planted in him. Besides, everything happens for a reason, don't you think? We all end up exactly where we're meant to be. He nodded, relieved, and walked back toward the bookstore where people were waiting to congratulate him. My mother watched him go, her hands still raised where she touched him, and I saw her fingers curl slowly into a fist. "Mom," I said quietly. She lowered her hand, uncurled her fingers. "I'm fine. Are you?" She turned to me then, and her eyes were clear, clearer than I'd seen them in months. "Yes, actually I am, because I know something he doesn't. I know that every time he looks at me now, part of him wonders. Part of him is afraid. And that," she took a breath, "that's enough. It has to be enough." We drove home in silence. The city lights blurred past the window, all those lives being lived in parallel to ours, all those private wars and quiet revenges happening behind closed doors. How many people were like my mother, I wondered, carrying old wounds and older rage, waiting for their moment? How many had already taken it? That winter, something unexpected happened. My mother started cooking again, really cooking, the way she used to dream about. She began with dinner parties at our house, elaborate multi-course meals that had our friends and neighbors raving. Then someone suggested she teach classes. She started small, hosting workshops in our kitchen, knife skills, sauce techniques, bread baking. Word spread. Within 6 months, she had a waiting list. One night, I found her in her office, the spare room she'd converted into a workspace, typing on her laptop. "What are you working on?" I asked. She glanced up, almost shy. "A cookbook, my own, my real recipes, the ones I never shared with Marcus, the ones I've been developing all these years for myself, for our family." She paused. "Your father thinks I should publish it. What do you think?" I looked at the manuscript on her screen, pages of careful notes and recipe tests, years of work hidden in the margins of her domestic life. "I think it's brilliant. I think you should absolutely do it." "Even if Marcus claims I'm copying him?" "Let him. You'll know the truth. I'll know the truth. And honestly," I sat down next to her, Anyone who really knows food will be able to tell the difference. Your work has always been better than his. It always will be." She smiled then, not the cold, sharp smile from the parking lot, but something genuine and warm. "You know what? You're right." She saved the document, closed the laptop. "I spent 25 years letting him steal my voice. I think it's time I took it back." The cookbook came out 2 years later. It wasn't a bestseller like Marcus's. It didn't have the marketing budget or the celebrity machine behind it. But it sold well enough, got good reviews from people who mattered, and most importantly, it was hers. Her name on the cover, her recipes, her story told the way she wanted to tell it. In the acknowledgments, she wrote, "To everyone who has had their work stolen, their credit erased, their contributions forgotten, this book is proof that it's never too late to reclaim your voice. Create anyway, fight back anyway. The truth always finds a way to surface." Marcus never commented on the book publicly, but at a family Christmas dinner that year, I saw him flip through it when he thought no one was watching. I saw him recognize recipes, saw the realization cross his face that my mother had been holding back her best work all along, that everything he'd stolen had been only the beginning of what she was capable of. He looked up and met my eyes across the room, and for a moment we both knew what the other was thinking. Then my mother appeared with dessert, a towering pavlova, meringue crisp and perfect, fruit glistening on top, and the moment passed. She served everyone with grace and skill, and when she got to Marcus, she gave him a generous slice and a warm smile. "Enjoy," she said. "I made it just for you." He stared at his plate for a long time before eating it, and I wondered if he'd ever be able to eat my mother's food again without wondering, without that tiny thread of fear. That was years ago now. I'm 32, living in my own apartment across town, working as a food writer, inspired, I think, by my mother's journey, though I've never told her that directly. My father retired last year. My brother is married with a kid of his own. Uncle Marcus is still successful, still running his restaurants, still writing cookbooks, though none have done as well as his first one. My mother teaches cooking classes full-time now, writes for several magazines, consults for restaurants. She's built a reputation entirely separate from Marcus, entirely her own. We have dinner together once a month, just the two of us, at different restaurants around the city. We talk about food, about life, about everything and nothing. We don't talk about that night anymore. The family dinner, the note, the poison, the revenge. It's in the past, settled, done. But sometimes, when we're tasting a particularly good dish, I see her face light up with that creative fire, and I think about all the years that fire was banked, hidden, stolen. And I think about how she took it back, not in the way I would have chosen, not in the way anyone would recommend, but in the way that worked for her, the way that let her sleep at night, the way that gave her back her power. Last week, at one of our dinners, she told me she's been seeing a therapist. "You were right," she said, sipping her wine. She always checks her wine carefully now, swirls it, examines it, a habit I doubt she's even aware of. About needing to talk to someone, about the anger. I thought once I'd settled things with Marcus, it would go away, but it didn't. It just evolved into something else. Regret, maybe, or grief for all the time I lost. "How's that going?" I asked. "The therapy?" "Hard. Good. Necessary." She smiled ruefully. "Turns out, carrying rage for 25 years does change you. Who knew?" "I knew," I said gently. "Yes, you did." She reached across the table, took my hand, her fingers warm and steady. "Thank you for not judging me." Or for judging me and loving me anyway. I know what I did was wrong. I know it. But I also can't say I wouldn't do it again. And I think I need to be okay with that contradiction. I need to forgive myself for being human, for being flawed, for making a choice that felt necessary, even if it wasn't right. I squeezed her hand. "You're doing the work. That's what matters." Am I? Sometimes I'm not sure. Sometimes I think I'm just learning to live with who I really am underneath all the roles I've played. Mother, wife, sister, chef. Underneath all that, I'm someone who believed in justice so strongly that I was willing to poison my own brother to achieve it. That's a heavy thing to carry. "But you also made sure he'd live," I pointed out. "You called for help. You didn't want him dead, just accountable, in your own way." Is there a difference, morally, I mean? I think so. Intent matters. Scale matters. You wanted him to understand pain, not to end him. That's different than murder. She nodded slowly. I tell myself that. In therapy, we talk about proportional response, about trauma reactions, about how betrayal rewires your brain. It helps, understanding the psychology of it, but it doesn't change what I did. It doesn't make it okay. Maybe it's not about making it okay, I said. Maybe it's about accepting that people are complicated, that good people can do bad things when they're hurt badly enough, that justice and revenge sometimes look the same from certain angles. We finished our meal. The restaurant around us hummed with conversation, with life, with people having their own dramas and joys and complicated relationships. Outside, the city stretched out in all directions, full of stories I'd never know, of revenges taken and forgiveness granted and wounds that never quite healed. As we were leaving, my mother paused at the door. You know, it's strange. I don't hate him anymore. Marcus. I look at him now and I just feel empty where that hate used to be. Like I carved it out that night and there's just a hollow space left. What are you filling it with? She considered the question. My work, I think. My students, my own legacy, the things I'm building now that no one can take from me. She looked at me. And you. Watching you become yourself, become strong and clear-eyed and willing to see the truth even when it's ugly, that matters more to me than any restaurant or cookbook or revenge ever could. Even though I know what you're capable of? Especially because of that. You know the worst of me and you're still here. That's love, isn't it? Real love, not the fairy tale kind, but the kind that survives truth. We walked to our cars under streetlights that turned the pavement gold. Before we parted, she hugged me, long and tight, the way she used to when I was small and the world was simpler. Or maybe the world was never simple and I'd just been too young to see its complications. Do you ever regret it? I asked into her shoulder. What you did? She pulled back, looked at me directly. Every day, and not at all. Both things are true. She touched my face gently. I regret that I felt I had to do it. I regret that the world is built in such a way that a woman's work can be stolen so easily, so legally, with so little recourse. I regret that forgiveness didn't feel possible, that letting go didn't feel like an option. But do I regret making him feel afraid? Making him understand that actions have consequences, even if they're legal? No, I don't. I can't. That's honest, at least. It's all I have left, honesty, with myself, with you, with my therapist. She smiled sadly. Your generation, you're better at this than mine was. You speak up, you fight back, you don't swallow things the way we were taught to. I admire that. But for me, I'd swallowed it so long that when I finally spit it out, it came out as poison. Maybe that's always how it works. Maybe rage held too long turns toxic. I thought about that as I drove home, about how anger transforms over time, how hurt ferments into something stronger and more dangerous when it's not allowed to breathe. About how my mother's generation of women had been taught to smile and be gracious while men took credit for their work, and how that pressure, applied over decades, had created something volatile. She wasn't unique, I realized. Everywhere I looked, once I started looking, I saw women carrying these stories. Women whose ideas had been stolen in meetings, whose contributions had been erased, whose voices had been talked over until they stopped trying to speak. Women who'd learned to work twice as hard for half the recognition, to give away their best ideas because fighting for credit was unbecoming, to watch men build empires on foundations the women had poured. My mother had just done what most of them probably fantasized about. She'd fought back. Quietly, carefully, with the same patience she'd shown in her cooking, letting things develop, waiting for the right temperature, knowing exactly when to act. It wasn't right, but it was understandable, and maybe that was the most complicated truth of all. The next time I saw Uncle Marcus was at my brother's daughter's christening. He looked older, more cautious, less effortlessly confident. He still dressed well, still laughed loudly, still dominated conversations, but there was a brittleness to it now, like someone performing themselves rather than being themselves. During the reception, I found myself standing next to him at the bar. We made small talk about the baby, about his restaurants, about my writing. Then, out of nowhere, he said, "Your mother's doing well. The cooking classes, the book, I'm proud of her." I looked at him sharply. "Are you?" He had the grace to look uncomfortable. I know things were complicated between us. With the business, I know she felt He stopped, started again. I was young and ambitious, and I made choices that hurt people, hurt her. I've thought about it a lot over the years. Have you? I kept my voice neutral, curious. That night, when I got sick, when I almost died. He stopped, stared into his drink. It changed me, made me realize how fragile everything is, how quickly it can all go away. I've been trying to be better since then, to be more aware, more careful, more fair. I wondered if he knew, if somewhere deep down he suspected what my mother had done, or if he'd convinced himself it was really just an allergic reaction, a random accident. Maybe it didn't matter. Maybe the point was that it had worked. He was different now, more cautious, less likely to take people for granted. The fear had achieved what confrontation never could have. "That's good," I said, finally. "Everyone deserves a second chance." He nodded, looked relieved. "Your mother, she's forgiven me, I think. We're okay now. We've moved past it." I thought about my mother's hollow space where the hate used to be, about how she still checked her wine before drinking it, still carried the weight of what she'd done, still went to therapy every week to unpack the rage that had defined her for so long. Moved past it? Sure. I'm glad, I lied, because what else was there to say? "She saved me, you know," Marcus continued, and there was something in his voice, something that made me think maybe he did know, on some level, even if he'd never admit it. That night, she was so calm, so quick to call for help. If she hadn't acted so fast, I might not have made it. I owe her my life. The irony was so thick I almost laughed. Instead, I just nodded. She's always been good in a crisis. The best. He raised his glass. To family, to second chances. To the people who save us even when we don't deserve it. I raised my glass and clinked it against his, thinking about all the ways that sentence could be interpreted, all the layers of truth and deception wound together like dough in a complicated braid. We drank, and across the room I saw my mother watching us. Our eyes met. She didn't smile, didn't nod, just looked at me with that clear, steady gaze that said she knew exactly what we were talking about, exactly what it meant. Then she turned back to my brother's wife, admiring the baby, cooing over tiny fingers and perfect toes, playing the role of doting grandmother with the same skill she brought to everything else. And I understood then that this was who she was, all of it, all at once. The loving mother and the careful poisoner, the patient teacher and the calculating avenger, the woman who'd lost everything and the woman who'd taken it back in blood. Not one or the other, but both, always both. The contradiction never resolved, because maybe it didn't need to be. People aren't simple. We like to pretend they are, good or bad, right or wrong, victim or villain. But real people are messier than that. They're capable of tremendous love and terrible cruelty, sometimes in the same breath. They can nurture with the same hands they use to hurt. They can be broken by injustice and empowered by revenge, diminished by betrayal and rebuilt by their own carefully planned retribution. My mother taught me that, not through her words, but through her actions that night and everything that came after. She taught me that justice is more complicated than courts and laws, that forgiveness isn't always possible or even desirable, that sometimes the only way through trauma is to transform it into action, even if that action crosses lines we're told never to cross. She also taught me that you live with your choices forever, that revenge doesn't erase what was done to you, doesn't heal the original wound, doesn't restore what was lost. It just creates a different kind of burden, one you carry alongside the old one, 2 weights instead of 1. Was it worth it for her? I don't know. She says she doesn't regret it, but she also goes to therapy every week and takes medication for anxiety, and sometimes wakes up at 3 in the morning with nightmares she won't describe. The hollow space where her hate used to be isn't empty. It's filled with guilt and grief and the knowledge of what she's capable of when pushed far enough. But she's also happier now than I've ever seen her, lighter somehow, despite the weight of her secret. She smiles more easily, laughs more freely, moves through the world with a confidence she didn't have before. She's building something real, something that belongs to her alone, and no one can take that from her this time because she's learned to protect it, to protect herself. Maybe that's what that night really gave her, not revenge, but permission. Permission to stop swallowing her rage, to stop making herself small, to stop letting other people define her worth and her work. Marcus might have been the target, but the real victory was over herself, over the learned helplessness and ingrained niceness that had made her so easy to exploit in the first place. I think about that sometimes, about the cost of being taught to be kind, to be accommodating, to not make waves. About how many women learn to apologize for existing, to minimize their contributions, to give away their power because claiming it would be selfish or aggressive or unfeminine. About how that training creates wounds that never show on the surface but eat away at you from the inside until one day you realize you've disappeared into other people's definitions of who you should be. My mother refused to disappear. She fought back. And yes, she fought back in a way that was wrong, that was dangerous, that could have gone so much worse than it did. But she fought. And now she exists in the world as herself, complex, contradictory, capable of both profound love and cold calculation, but undeniably, authentically herself. I'm a writer because of her, I realize now. Because she taught me, not through lectures, but through living, that stories matter, that truth matters, that reclaiming your narrative is worth fighting for, even when the fight gets ugly. She lost her first story, the one about the brilliant chef who built an empire, but she's writing a new one now, and this time she's holding the pen. Last month, at one of our dinners, she told me she's been approached about a TV show, a cooking program focused on technique and creativity, the kind of thing she would have killed for 20 years ago. She's thinking about doing it. Marcus will hate it, she said, not quite smiling. He'll see it as competition. Is it? No, it's not about him anymore. It stopped being about him the moment I put the book out, built my own reputation, proved I could succeed without his name or his help or his permission. She paused. But if he happens to feel threatened by my success, well, that's just a bonus. Mom, I said, half laughing, half shocked, that's petty. I'm aware. She grinned then, and it was wicked and entirely unapologetic. I've earned the right to be a little petty. I've done the therapy, I've done the work, I've learned to channel my rage into productivity instead of poison, but I'm still human, and humans sometimes enjoy watching the people who hurt them squirm. Fair enough, I said, because it was. Besides, she continued, maybe seeing me succeed will teach him something. Maybe it'll make him think twice before taking advantage of someone else. Maybe it'll inspire some other woman who's been stolen from to fight back. Not the way I did, obviously, but in her own way. To refuse to disappear, to insist on being seen. Is that what this has all been about? Making sure you're seen? She considered the question seriously. In part, but mostly it's been about seeing myself, about recognizing my own worth independent of whether anyone else acknowledges it. I spent so long defining myself through other people, as Marcus's sister, your father's wife, your mother, the chef who lost her restaurant, other people's definitions, other people's stories. That night, when I poisoned Marcus, she said it so casually, like she was describing making tea. That was the first time in 25 years I'd acted purely for myself, not as a mother protecting her children, or a wife supporting her husband, or a sister keeping the peace. Just as myself, acting on my own beliefs about justice and consequences. And now? Now I'm learning to act as myself all the time, in ways that don't require poison, she added with a slight smile. But the principle stands. I'm done being defined by other people's needs and expectations. I'm done making myself small so other people can feel big. I'm done apologizing for taking up space. I looked at her across the table, at this complicated woman who'd given me life and taught me to cook and once poisoned her brother because she couldn't live with the injustice anymore. At this woman who was flawed and fierce and finally free. I'm proud of you, I said. She blinked, surprised. Even knowing what you know? Because I know what I know. Because you're not perfect, you're real. And because you taught me the most important lesson anyone ever could, that you get to write your own story, even if you have to burn the old one down to do it. Her eyes filled with tears. She reached across the table and took my hand, and her fingers were warm and steady and strong. Thank you, she whispered, for understanding, for not walking away, for seeing all of me and not flinching. You're my mother, I said simply. I love you, not in spite of who you are, but because of it. All of it. We sat like that for a long moment, hands linked across the table, two women who understood that love and morality don't always align, that family means seeing the truth and choosing connection anyway, that forgiveness sometimes looks like acceptance rather than absolution. The restaurant continued around us, dishes clattering, conversations flowing, life happening in its messy, complicated, beautiful way. And I thought about that family dinner years ago, about the note my mother had slipped into my hand, about how that single act of protection had led me here, to this deeper understanding of who she was and who I wanted to be. She'd saved me that night without a word, kept me separate from the violence she was about to enact, made sure I'd be safe even as she crossed the line she could never uncross. And in doing so, she'd taught me something profound about love, that it can coexist with darkness, that it can encompass contradiction, that it's not about perfection, but about showing up as your full self and trusting the other person to handle it. Some people might say she should have been arrested, prosecuted, punished. They'd say I should have turned her in, that I'm complicit by keeping her secret. They'd say revenge is always wrong, that two wrongs don't make a right, that the ends don't justify the means. And maybe they're right, probably they're right, from a certain moral standpoint. But morality is easy when you're talking about other people's choices, other people's pain. It gets a lot more complicated when it's your mother, when you've watched her suffer in silence for decades, when you understand exactly what was stolen from her and how the law offered her no recourse. I'm not saying what she did was right. I'm saying I understand why she did it. I'm saying that living in the gray area between right and wrong is more honest than pretending clear lines exist when they don't. I'm saying that judgment is a luxury afforded to people who haven't been hurt badly enough to consider desperate measures. My mother poisoned her brother, and I'm still sitting across from her at dinner, holding her hand, proud of who she's become. That's my truth. Complicated, morally ambiguous, and entirely mine. We finished our meal. She tried the dessert menu, debating between 3 options with the seriousness she brought to all food decisions. I watched her and thought about how she'd survived, not just the betrayal, but the years after it, the slow rebuilding, the patient planning, the careful act of taking back what was hers. Not the restaurant or the money, those were gone forever, but her sense of self, her creative voice, her refusal to be erased. In the end, that was the real victory. Not poisoning Marcus, that was just a moment, a release of pressure that had been building for 25 years. The real victory was this: my mother, at 60, finally living as herself, teaching the cooking she loved, writing books under her own name, considering TV offers, taking up space without apology. The real victory was her freedom from the story she'd been told about herself and her courage to write a new one. "I'll take the chocolate torte," she told the server. Then to me, "Want to split it?" "Always," I said. The dessert came, dark and rich, dusted with cocoa powder and topped with fresh raspberries that gleamed like jewels. We each took a bite, and my mother closed her eyes in appreciation, analyzing the flavors the way she always did, the quality of the chocolate, the balance of sweet and bitter, the texture of the ganache. "Good," she pronounced. "Not perfect, but good." "What would make it perfect?" She smiled. "A different ratio of dark to milk chocolate, a touch of orange zest in the ganache, And the raspberries should be macerated first, just slightly, to bring out their sweetness. She opened her eyes, looked at me. I'll make you one the right way next week. I'd like that. We finished the torte in comfortable silence, and when the check came, we fought over it as always, and as always, we split it down the middle because we were both independent women who paid our own way. We walked out into the autumn evening, leaves skittering across the sidewalk in the wind, the air sharp with the promise of winter coming. At our cars, we hugged goodbye, and she held on a little longer than usual. I love you, she said into my hair, more than you'll ever know. You're the best thing I ever made. Better than the bread? She laughed, pulled back to look at me. Even better than the bread? That's saying something. It is, she agreed. It really is. I watched her drive away, taillights disappearing into traffic, and I felt the weight of everything I knew about her, everything she'd confessed, everything I'd chosen not to tell. It was heavy, that knowledge, but not unbearable, because alongside it was everything else she'd given me, her strength, her resilience, her refusal to disappear, her proof that you could survive betrayal and rebuild yourself into something stronger than you were before. She'd saved me that night with a folded note and a whispered warning, but she'd also saved me in a bigger way by showing me what it looked like to fight back against injustice, even when the fight was ugly. By demonstrating that women don't have to accept what's done to them, don't have to forgive the unforgivable, don't have to make themselves small and palatable and safe. The world had tried to erase my mother. It had taken her work, her credit, her dreams, and given them to someone else. It had told her to be grateful for what she had, to let bygones be bygones, to smile and move on. And for 25 years, she'd tried. She'd swallowed her rage, played her role, been the good sister and the good wife and the good mother, until the night she decided enough was enough, until the night she poisoned the man who'd stolen her life and dared him to survive it, until the night she took back her power in the only way she could find, and then, and this was crucial, learned to channel that power into something creative rather than destructive. The poison was a turning point, not an end point. It was the moment my mother stopped swallowing and started spitting fire. And yes, someone got burned. But from those ashes, she rebuilt herself into something magnificent. That's what I think about now, years later, when I write about food and family and the complicated ways people hurt and heal each other. I think about my mother's hands working dough, creating something beautiful from basic ingredients. I think about how she measured each component precisely, knowing exactly how much of what to add and when. I think about how cooking is transformation, taking raw materials and changing them through heat and time and skill into something entirely new. She did that with herself. Took the raw material of her rage and betrayal, applied heat and pressure and time, and transformed it into strength and purpose and finally peace. The process wasn't pretty. It involved poison and lies and moral lines crossed. But the result, my mother, free and creative and unapologetically herself, was worth it. At least to me, at least to her, and maybe that's all that matters in the end. Not what's objectively right or wrong, but what allows you to live with yourself, to sleep at night, to look in the mirror and recognize the person looking back. My mother can do that now. She's at peace with her choices, at peace with her contradictions, at peace with being both the woman who nurtures and the woman who destroys when pushed too far. She's at peace. And she taught me that sometimes peace doesn't come from forgiveness or letting go. Sometimes it comes from fighting back, from refusing to be a victim, from taking the power that was stolen and reclaiming it however you can. That's her legacy to me. Not recipes or cooking techniques, though she gave me those too. But this deeper lesson about survival, about resilience, about the kind of strength that looks like patience until the moment it transforms into action, she saved me without a word that night. But more than that, she taught me how to save myself, how to recognize when something is poisoning you from the inside out, how to protect what matters, how to fight back when the world tells you to stay quiet, and how to breathe again when someone's taken all the air from the room. That's what mothers do, I suppose, if we're lucky. They show us what it means to be human in all its complicated glory. They love us enough to protect us from their darkest moments, and they trust us enough to eventually share the truth. They teach us that we're capable of both tremendous good and terrible choices, and that living well means accepting both and choosing carefully which one to feed. My mother chose revenge once, and love every day since. She chose darkness for one night and has spent years choosing light. She crossed a line she can never uncross and has built a life worth living on the other side of it. And me? I choose to witness it all, to hold the complexity without judgment, to love her not despite who she is, but because of it. I choose to carry her secret in her strength, her darkness, and her light, and to understand that both exist in me too. We're all capable of both. The question is just what we do with that knowledge. I'm still figuring that out, but I know this much. When the world tries to poison you, you don't have to swallow it. You can spit it back. You can transform it. You can use it as fuel to become more yourself, more powerful, more free. My mother taught me that, and I'll carry that lesson, along with her secret, along with her love, along with the weight of understanding what she did and why, for the rest of my life. She saved me with a note and a warning. But more importantly, she showed me it was possible to save yourself, even when it requires becoming someone you never thought you'd be, even when it means carrying contradictions, even when it means living in the gray area between right and wrong, justice and revenge, love and fear. That night at dinner years ago, when everything changed, that was the night I learned who my mother really was. Not a saint, not a villain, but a woman, complex and flawed and capable of both profound love and cold calculation. A woman who'd been betrayed and spent 25 years planning her response. A woman who poisoned her brother and then saved his life. A woman who taught me to bake bread and also how to fight back when someone tries to erase you. She's all of it, all at once, and I love her for exactly that, for being real instead of perfect, for showing me that survival sometimes looks like revenge, and that healing sometimes starts with hurting back, and that the most important thing is not whether your choices are right, but whether they're yours. She took back her story. She wrote her own ending, and she taught me to do the same. That's enough. That has to be enough. Because in the end, we're all just trying to breathe in a world that keeps taking the air from the room. And if my mother taught me anything, it's this. When someone tries to suffocate you, you learn to breathe differently. You learn to breathe fire.